This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, and I'm reading some Slenderman shit, tentacle tossers. Today, at this moment in non-time, we're going to be taking a look at Silence in the Rain on Creepypasta.com. Link is in the description. Do not go there without having your ad blocks on. Let's get into this. The cat walks slowly across the concrete, pausing to lick its paw in the middle. It sat there in the moonlight, just watching the skies in heavy rain. The clouds swirled, and the night was young. Perhaps it could find a confused mouse or a drowned frog in this time. Its tail moved with anticipation of its hunt. Perfectly interested to know what's going to happen next. However, we're going into this with a presupposition that it's going to be about Slenderman. I don't care for the third-person perspective. I would rather it be a first-person perspective. I would rather be told this by someone to ground us into the reality, because Slenderman is based around that level of realism, that this is a document, not a story. But as a story, this is perfectly interesting to read. I want to know what happens with this cat. A chain-link fence swung open with surprising speed, startling the cat, resulting in a hissy fit. The man who opened it carried no thought of the terrible weather, cat, or of anything else he was up against. Yelling an obscenity, he ran as fast as he could through the opening. That thing wasn't getting him. No way. He sprinted through the gate and into the alleyway. He didn't know why, and he didn't know how, but something was following him. His first inclination was, when he kept seeing this menacing figure at every turn. No matter where he went, he kept seeing it. He had thought that it might be a person following him at first, but that had quickly changed when he saw the height and shape of the being. Good description, good action, good visuals being described here. The idea of like a chain link fence swung open with a surprising speed, startling the cat. That is great. He's yelling obscenities. He's freaked out. This is conveying the panic in the way that it's written, and then the paragraph slows down to explain bits of the scenario as soon as they get to the part about he didn't know why, blah, 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 something was following him. And when they get to that part, they slow down enough to let you see an idea of what this thing could possibly be. So far, though, we don't have confirmation that it's Slenderman. Obviously, you and I know that it's Slenderman. You clicked on this video that said Slenderman. I clicked on this thing that said Slenderman. So that's going to ruin the surprise. But so far, we just know that there is something abnormal and humanoid. Great. A fork in the alley. Mark sped towards the right, not because of any good feeling, but because he knew whatever it was would catch him no matter which way he went. Okay, getting across the futility of this, but still there's that panic to run. And now we know our protagonist is named Mark. The figure always seemed to be 2 steps ahead of him. Every time he turned around, there it was, silent as the night, just watching him. He could never make out its features in the rain. As it blurred his vision, he could tell it was tall, and it seemed to have black and white skin. With the black covering the legs and torso. He had figured, since it didn't move when it was being watched, he could look at it and just keep it frozen. It worked, but when he stared at it, he felt sick, like something was calling its way out of him. His worst memories resurfaced in his brain, among them an embarrassing date, a lost pet, his sister's funeral. He had turned away. He crawled for a second until he could stand up again. Then he ran from the creature, that thing, like his memories. He could not seem to escape them. So all of these stories have a specific trope of, he seemed to not have a face. It was like it was blurred out, but I wasn't sure. This one has the most plausible explanation of he's running through the rain, and the rain is obscuring his vision, to the point where he's not even sure why would you assume that a monster is wearing a business suit? And so once he sees that the thing has an inhuman form, he doesn't think that it would have a business suit, so he's just assuming that it's skin. This is all pretty sensible, as is the conundrum of being caught between a rock and a hard place with either face the thing and feel sick and know that that is a more intense danger than this thing actually chasing you down, so he opts to run from it instead. All of this is interesting. Again, the writing really conveys that panic. I would prefer this to be written in first person, honestly. I think it would do the story wonders. But maybe there's a reason why they can't do that at this point, and maybe the author just doesn't feel that way. So let's press on. Suddenly Mark slipped on a giant puddle, interrupting his thoughts. Immediately his jeans and hoodie became soaked on contact. Picking himself up from the water, that feeling to look back was too great. He turned around. There it stood, as real and frightening as ever. What really startled him was that it was closer because of his tumble, only a mere 20 feet away. Trying not to scream, in case that triggered a reaction from the creature, he spun around and ran. Not as big of a fan of this paragraph. Again, the panic is still coming across well. The mention of our protagonist wearing a hoodie is subtle enough to where it's like, okay, whatever, it's fine. It's not like the word hoodie is given specific weight to it. But the whole thing about him being 20 feet away, to think of a more creative way to phrase that, rather than a direct unit of measurement. So here we have what appears to be a page break. The rabbit may not know of the fox, but it will sense danger when it presents itself. This was not unlike the feeling he felt right now. He didn't know what it was or why it wanted him, but he felt his genetic memory that this thing was a great threat. If this thing was chasing him, it probably chased other people, which meant that nobody had gotten away from this thing ever, or else they didn't live long enough afterwards to tell the tale. Mention of genetic memory, little on the nose, but if you're not looking for the words genetic memory, you wouldn't know that they have specific meaning. If you don't know genetic memory, Google, or rather Bing, genetic memory and Creepypasta together. Mark ran out the alleyway and into the street. The blood had been coming down hard. The rain, oh my god, Brandon. Ugh, am I hallucinating? I swear I read blood. The rain had been coming down hard. He knew that, but until now he hadn't realized how much. The street was overflowing with water. It was even coming into the sidewalks, a flash flood. He wasn't really surprised nobody was out, even if it was New York. With this weather, everyone else would be inside, closed and locked doors, leaving him alone with. Realizing his mistake, he threw himself into the street while turning around. The figure had come to a stop about 10 feet from where he was. Then he went under the water. Okay, so a part of New York is flooded. It's nice that we're in a nice populated area as opposed to rural areas, which is where these stories tend to take place, out where there are nice parks and woods and things of that nature. Still not a fan of like, he's 20 feet behind me. He's 10 feet behind me. He's right behind me. Use more descriptive language than that, I would definitely say. However, again, this is all conveying a panic. We're not getting the before and the after, and if we're going to write a short story, this might be a really effective strategy for telling a flash fiction bit of Slenderman lore, of him chasing down one specific person. However, I gotta hammer home on this. He didn't know why he was being chased. Okay, then just tell it from his perspective, and then we won't have to explain that. You know, it'll have him saying, I don't know why it's chasing me, carries more weight than I, the person telling you the story, say that he didn't understand why it was chasing him. It's more immediate. It has a greater sense of impact. So that's why I recommend that, among many other reasons. But man, there has to be a really bad flood for him to be going under the water. Water and fire also very important theming in the world of Slenderman, you know? It was a little surprising being underwater in a city, but at least it wasn't deep. Finding a hole in the asphalt, he pushed himself up and out of the water. Looking around, he found that the street was going uphill or downhill depending on how you look at it. This meant that there was a slight current to the water, not enough to pull him away, but enough to make him unsteady. Mark looked around, frantic about the creature's whereabouts. In the pouring rain, he couldn't see 10 feet in front of him. See there, that is a sensible way to say 10 feet in front of you, because that's, in common parlance, that's how people speak. If the creature really wanted him, then he was about as vulnerable as possibly could have been. Looking around, he finally spotted it about a yard away. Again, I know I'm harping on this. First person really helps this along. Looking around, I found that the street was going uphill or downhill depending on how you look at it. That is a very human thing to say, but this is an omnipotent force here that is telling us this story. If it's a person saying that, then they would make that kind of mistake, and that would, this person is disoriented, and now they're trying to orient themselves. And, it was a street going uphill or downhill. I guess it was a slant, guys. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, that's the sensible way that a person speaks when they're, trying to orient themselves. But again, the sense of panic and urgency is so great here. This starts at high tension and continues and just continues. It's not front loading. It's just to the front of the action, There's not a whole lot of mystery around this besides the Slenderman himself and his motives and all of that kind of stuff. But, you know what? I'm not even actually sure that we have confirmation that this is Slenderman at this point. But let's press on. This close and in the rain, it looked like something out of a horror movie. Don't. It stood around 8 feet tall at first glance. Again, 8 feet tall. That's how you would describe something like that. People describe people by height, that makes sense. But as soon as he tried to find its head, it just seemed to get taller, like an endless ladder. Ooh. Looking closely at it, he noticed that what he had originally thought was skin was actually a formal suit, complete with tie. It was both comical and terrifying at the same time, much like a clown. It, uncapitalized, took an ordinary object and perverted it, twisted it into something sick. Upon even closer inspection, he realized it was far from perfect. It had large rips in the tie, and one sleeve was torn off about halfway. It had many tears in the fabric and stained with several foreboding rust-colored spots. But when he finally found its face, he screamed. It wasn't that there was no face, but it was just so horrible that his mind immediately erased the image from his head. Every second he spent staring at it, he could literally not remember what it was, but it terrified him beyond belief. The panic, the tension, and all of that stuff is continuing, but at this point, it doesn't sound like we're describing Slenderman. And in other stories, it felt like they were forcing Slenderman onto a story. Here, it feels like that their author was writing Slenderman, and then just started making a character that isn't omnipotent, that can suffer damage. The suit is supposed to be perfect, It's supposed to be just impeccable and all of that kind of stuff. The rust-colored spots and indicating blood, but let's take Slenderman out of the context. Is this working as a story? I certainly think it is. I know we've gotten this far into it, but I want you to erase Slenderman from your mind and continue under the premise that this is just an original horror story, and let me know in the comments how you feel it's succeeding so far. Snapping himself out of his trance, he moved to the right, narrowly avoiding a tentacle? How did he miss that? Ducking, he closely evaded decapitation from another. Remembering the current, he threw himself down the street, being swept away with the current down the hill. The entity did not follow, so apparently our entity here, not Slenderman, much like the operator, not Slenderman, is afraid of slip and slides. Floating down, unable to get a grip, Mark just tried to stay up on his butt while sliding. Looking ahead, he found to his horror that the creature was already at the bottom of the large hill. Using his feet to steer, he sped himself towards a lamppost on the sidewalk, and then, spreading out his legs, his balls hit the lamppost. Reaching down, he attempted to grab it, only to find himself falling. Grabbing the other edge of the sidewalk, as not to be swept in, he realized there must have been an open sewer grate down below him, unseen in the water. Cursing, he tried to pull himself up. Looking to his right, he spotted the figure about 60 yards away now. Gripping the concrete, he tried to heave himself up. Another quick glance to his right, 20 feet away. The line 20 feet away is its own paragraph break, and there's another page break coming up. I really don't get that's wrong. I do get the obsession with using numerical values to explain how something, where something is in relation to you, but you've got to be careful about that if it's not used in common parlance. Giving it up, Mark let go and fell into the water. After 4 seconds of terrifying free fall, he hit the ground. Hearing a crack and experiencing extreme pain, he moved his left leg. It felt fine. Then the other. Once he moved it, he felt incredibly intense pain at the base of his thigh. That meant it was his hip. Shit. Trying to stand up, he found he couldn't. The pain, see like here, that meant it was his hip, so that means someone is logicking something out. Otherwise you wouldn't say the phrase, that meant it was his hip. And then there's the single line, shit. Like, our God narrator is saying shit? Just have it be a human being that's saying shit, you know? The pain was too unbearable. He started crawling, knowing he had to get away. Dragging himself across the ground, he came across the sewer canal that carried rainwater and gunk in under the street. Looking to his left, he thought he had saw a light. He couldn't tell. His vision was blurry. Funnily enough, though, it got cloudier. Then the sick feeling started again, along with the memories. Realizing his fate, he tried to drag himself into the canal so he could drown. Surely it would be a more peaceful death than whatever this being had in store for him. Not sure how to feel about this, because on one hand, logically he's right. You don't want to deal with whatever that thing is going to throw at you. On the other hand, it seems like a severe reaction, so I'm not sure how to feel about that, quite honestly. Right as his body fell in, he felt a tendril grab him by the ankle and lift him out of the water. Flipping him right side up, he hung there, looking at the creature for the first time. Face to face, he was filled with unimaginable terror. His body radiated evil, and he vomited from the sickness again and again. Then he felt 2 claw-like fingers lightly position themselves on his eyes. He tensed up, realizing what he was about to do. So this creature has a violent tendency, and at this point, I'm wondering if they're intentionally trying to break away from what Slenderman is known as, or they're trying to do their own thing, and this is just miscategorized. It's a little weird, the violent nature of it, but the image of him being down in this sewer area, trying to drown himself, and a tendril grabbing his ankle, that is interesting. But imagine if it was described in first person, where his eyes are closed because he can't see anything, because he doesn't want to get the poopy water in his eyeballs, and then he just feels something tugging at his ankle and then lifts him out. That I think is powerful. So now we have another break here. The woman opened her apartment room window. Looking out into the rain, she thought she had heard screams, but there was silence. But for the rain now, there was no point looking outside anyway. There was nothing to see. The rain must have been coming down very hard, as it became. That's weird phrasing. She thought about her mother, and the familiar sadness washed over her. She turned away from the window. Sitting down by the lamp, she began to read a book. Looking up slightly, she was startled to think she had briefly seen the faint outline of a man outside her window, but that was impossible. Her room was on the 5th floor of the building. She laughed at the absurd thought. And then an entire page break only to say the single sentence. Then she saw the other shadow standing next to her own. Credit to the doctor. This is rated 7.9 out of 10, and I don't have a rating system, but I'm going to agree with that. This overall, on its own merits, is pretty interesting, extremely tense, really keeps you invested in the story. This last bit with the woman in her apartment window, completely unnecessary, should be cut out entirely. For the sense of urgency that's being conveyed through third person, just imagine how much better it would be in first person, guys. And I really am not against a third person narrative, but when you're trying to have a radically realistic story, you're trying to ground this, you're making it about Slenderman or something along those lines, you really do want that first person perspective. It's a thing I really insist upon, guys. I think that maybe the author was trying to push this whole, like, Slenderman, punish Slenderman thing, like punish Snake, but he's been through some things, he's had damage and everything. Wasn't a fan of that. It wasn't a fan of Slenderman trying to take out the eyeballs, but overall, the tension was just so good that I was really invested. Here's a comment on the page by GWY on the Creepypasta.com page. Had a lot of potential but ultimately failed. I'm a huge fan of Slenderpasta, but that felt like it should have been more drawn out and a bit more, I don't know, it was just missing something. I've got to disagree. I think that it maybe had too much stuff. It wasn't drawn out. I think it was the perfect length except for the last part. In terms of missing something, I highly disagree. I felt that it had everything that it needed. It just needed to be streamlined a little bit, in my personal opinion. And I'll leave you with this, a comment from the doctor himself. Thanks for the awesome feedback. Hope to get another one in this submission period. So it seems as though the doctor is receptive to criticism, and I can tell that from the way that they write. People who are resistant to criticism don't write with this level of tension. That only comes through getting feedback and being willing to hear what other people have to say about your work. Now, if you enjoyed that, consider helping out the community and supporting my channel. You can support the community by conversing in the comments below and going to toospooky.com. That's TOO spooky.com for original horror stories. Make sure to look into Raw Dog Readings here on YouTube. They read creepy stories and analyze them. Just like me. You can support me by following me on social media, links down in the description, and pledging to my Patreon, which is also down below. Thank you so much for your time, and now on to our sponsor at this non-moment in time. Teleportation. Teleportation. Zip zoop zippity doo.